This is the Ethanol Report, the industry podcast from the Renewable Fuels Association since 2008. I'm Cindy Zimmerman. The 31st Annual National Ethanol Conference was held this past week in Orlando, Florida, and Renewable Fuels Association President and CEO Jeff Cooper says it was another successful conference at a critical time for the industry.
Well, the conference went very well. We had excellent attendance, engaged attendees. The sessions were packed, lots of great questions, lots of great discussion. There's just so much happening in the industry right now that this was a great time to get everybody together and get focused on, some of the major issues that we're facing right now.
The need for year-round nationwide E15 dominated discussions at the NEC as the deadline for the Congressional Council tasked with coming up with legislation came and went during the conference. But Cooper says they're not giving up.
We're going to keep fighting to make that happen, and of course we're going to see how this council process plays out. We know that the members of that council got an earful yesterday. Yesterday was their deadline to produce legislation and actually vote on legislation. But we haven't even seen text of legislation, so we know that they've still got a lot of work to do. We remain somewhat hopeful, fingers crossed, that they're able to get some legislation drafted that meets the compromise criteria that they're looking for. And is still suitable to us and acceptable to our industry, and then the real task becomes how do you move it? How do you get it out of the House? How do you get it through the Senate? And how do you get it to the president's desk as soon as possible? He was very clear, President Trump was, in his remarks in Iowa about a month ago when he said, get me that legislation as soon as you possibly can, and I will sign it into law. And we remain hopeful that can happen before summer. Again, right now, sitting where we are, it's hard to see what that pathway to final passage looks like. If we don't get it done in time for summer, then the next opportunity is probably going to be sometime in the fall, maybe even after the midterms in the lame duck session. We know there will be some legislation that must pass and will need to move in the fall and heading into the winter. So hopefully it doesn't come to that. Hopefully this council can get its job done, but we'll have to wait and see.
While the ethanol industry is used to a good fight, Cooper says the mood is somewhat conflicted this year.
My answer after talking to hundreds of folks this week, the response has been a little bit bipolar. People are incredibly frustrated. They're angry. They're outraged that we still don't have this E15 legislation done. We've had promises made to us. We've had commitments made to us. And yet here we are in the same place we've been for the last 12 years, no year-round E15 legislation. So there's a lot of anger and outrage about that. On the other hand, I guess the other pole, the other piece of the bipolar response that I mentioned is there still is so much optimism and so much excitement about the future of this industry when we're talking about opportunities like the maritime fuel market, aviation fuel, the opportunities to continue reducing carbon intensity, carbon capture and sequestration, some of the new carbon utilization things that were discussed this morning. So I think there's a tremendous amount of excitement, optimism, and hope about where this future is headed. We had a very good year in 2025, looking at another good year in 2026, but we need some help. And again, the theme of this conference was unleashing ethanol. Let us off the leash. Let us do more. We can always do more to support the goals that I think every American shares, which is lower energy prices, a more secure domestic energy supply, a cleaner environment. We're doing all those things today with ethanol, but we could do so much more if some of these artificial barriers and constraints were removed from the industry.
Unleashing E15 was the first panel of the conference, led by RFA's Senior Vice President for Industry Relations and Market Development, Robert White. Chuck Zimmerman interviewed Robert before he headed to San Antonio to man RFA's booth at the Commodity Classic.
When it says unleashing E15, what does that mean, and what were the kind of comments that you heard with your folks on the panel?
Well, unfortunately, right now we're kind of hamstrung on E15, and this particular panel went coast to coast from Sacramento to Washington, D.C. So we now have legalized E15 in California thanks to a lot of hard work from the RFA, both with CARB and through legislation last year known as AB 30. We had Governor Newsom include funding for CARB in his budget, and also legislation that he signed in October legalizing immediately E15. Unfortunately, we have one last hiccup with some equipment through the fire marshal on a outdated requirement with stage 2 vapor recovery, but we're working through that and hope to have that resolved soon. And then you flip clear to, obviously, Washington, D.C. We're still trying to resolve year-round E15 through Congress and ultimately get that to the president's desk, who's said repeatedly he's waiting on it and will sign it once he gets to him. So we know we covered all those bases, and then, one of the points I wanted to leave with the audience on a good note is to remind everyone that we do have a lot of areas where we can sell E15 without congressional effort, and that is the reformulated gasoline markets, that is the opt-out states where the governors have shown leadership, and of course when California opens, they have low volatility fuel and will be allowed to sell E15 year-round there as well. So you add all that up, and it's still about half the gas stations in the country and almost 45% of the fuel. And just last night, Governor Kelly from my home state of Kansas announced that if Congress does not pass year-round E15 by the end of March, that she's also going to join the opt-out states. So Kansas is going to finally get into the game as well. And so, again, adding more to those guaranteed markets that will be able to sell year-round E15 with or without Congress. But obviously the goal here is to have congressional action and allow E15 to be unleashed.
Do members of RFA feel disappointed that we just kind of are still waiting and waiting?
I think everybody is. I mean, the idea that E15 was approved in July of 2012 and it is February 2026 and we're still discussing this is mind-boggling. This is a no-cost piece of legislation. In fact, now the Congressional Budget Office says it's a $68 billion savings to the federal government and the U.S. taxpayer by federal programs for U.S. agriculture. And looking at the state of the farm economy and the number of bankruptcies that are going on, commodity prices in the cellar. I'm actually headed to Commodity Classic from here to be with farmers, soybean, corn, wheat, and sorghum. And I know the stories that I'm going to hear over and over and how challenging times are. And it's unfortunate. It doesn't have to be that way, but yet here we are. And the E15 Council, their challenge was to have legislation today, and we haven't even seen drafts. So obviously our expectations are low at the moment, but we hope to be proven wrong today.
Anything else you might want to say we haven't talked about with your panel?
RFA's Senior Vice President for Government and Public Affairs, Troy Bradenkamp, led the policy panel discussion at NEC, and he's been dealing with E15 on a daily basis in RFA's Washington, D.C. office.
A day doesn't go by that I don't get asked the question, where are we at on E15? Why haven't we gotten E15 done yet? So I really wanted that panel to spend some time talking about, where have we been? Why haven't we gotten it done? Kind of pull the curtain back a little bit on the process, and I thought they did a really good job talking it through. We came close back in December of 2024. Then in 2025, we revamped the package with the help of the American Petroleum Institute. They wanted to see some changes to the small refinery exemption program, and we combined that with the E15 language and then tried it again and unfortunately failed to get it done on this January spending package, and then we talked through that. And so I thought it was important for the NEC audience to hear that it's not as easy as it seems like it should be. Even though we had 90 to 95% of the liquid fuel value chain in agreement on what RFA and API had agreed to. We still had this handful of medium-sized refineries, and by handful I mean really 6 medium-sized refinery companies that were losing some access to the SRE program with the proposed changes, and they were able to block the 95% of the value chain that agreed to the changes from getting those adopted in that January spending package. So unfortunately, we are waiting to see what happens with this E15 World Domestic Energy Council. I don't hold out a whole lot of hope that we're going to get anything done. And then obviously, assuming nothing gets done there, then we have to turn our attention to the summer driving season and figure out how we get E15 on emergency waivers and not disrupt supply through that, and then obviously still work toward another target to put E15 on before the end of the calendar year. Until we get E15 over the finish line, we won't stop. And so that really is priority number one. And so that will be our focus, and we will have to continue to push forward and look at different avenues, look at different vehicles, try different angles until we find something that is going to get us to the finish line. That's really the top goal. And we kind of wrapped up the whole panel, talking through, the renewable volume obligations. We had the deputy administrator of the EPA down here who made some news announcing that the Set 2 RVOs for 2026 and 2027 had finally, or were going over to OMB today, which is really the final step to get those finalized, and that will be good because having that certainty is something that the industry needs. So we talked through that, and then we finished that panel really just talking about, what is the future of the liquid fuel market, and I think there's a lot of optimism there. From API's perspective, they see global demand for liquid fuels growing. That could be from light duty vehicles, but that could also be even from the AI movement and just the energy demand overall growing. And so you're going to need it from all sectors. And so we've also seen that from the biofuel side, and particularly from ethanol. We set another record year for ethanol exports. And so things are looking up. We just got to get these market certainties set, and certainly E15 remains the top priority for RFA.
As Troy noted, there was breaking news made at the NEC by EPA Assistant Administrator for Air and Radiation, Aaron Szabo.
Now I'm going to break some news. The RFS Set 2 final rule is going to OMB today, and we will be finalizing the rule before the end of March. Yeah, you can clap to that. Yeah, you all have been asking, so it's happening, This is after constant work and deliberation by our fantastic team in OAR in consultation with other federal workers in the federal government. This has been informed by 5 days of public hearings, listening to over 140 speakers, over 2,000 public comments. That's just like each individual one, as I'm sure I know RFA did, and many others. There are usually dozens, if not hundreds of pages of comments, so we haven't done that math yet, but, tens of thousands of actual substantive arguments. We've been working hard to get Set 2 completed as quickly as possible. We listened to you all when we proposed Set 2, that you all needed us to resolve the small refinery exemptions before finalizing Set 2 to provide certainty. So that is exactly what we did. Unfortunately, that added more complexity and work for our team, so this final rule is coming out later than we initially planned. We have not delayed this rule for any reason or by any request. This is really hard, and we want to make sure we do it right to give you all the certainty you all ask for and deserve.
Getting away from the frustration and uncertainty of E15, the NEC also focused on the more positive news for the ethanol industry: record exports in 2025. RFA's Ed Hubbard is the exports expert who headed up that panel at the conference.
This past year, we've had tremendous exponential growth in ethanol exports. Over 300 million in just 1 year of increased demand. That was on top of last year's record-breaking 1.9 billion gallons. No one ever thought we'd ever get past 2 billion, and we went past it and then some, all the way to 2.18 billion gallons, which is several years ago was unheard of. And each one of those individuals on that stage represented part of that growth. In particular, Canada, which represented our number one market with 729 million gallons of export in 1 year alone. Then we also had the European Union, a representative from the European Union, an analyst and market advocate for years, Alberto Carmona Bosch. And then we also had one of the other dynamic markets really is Central and South America. One of the individuals, Federico Salcedo, I've been working with for years, not just in a few markets, but a number of markets throughout South America.
How would you describe how important this export market is?
It certainly makes it competitive. This is what's going on right now. We've grown. Last year we had, like I said, we had 1.96 billion, and then we're at 2.18, and that trajectory, I believe, we're going to break another record next year, because there are a couple key markets that were not represented on that stage today. The key markets that I've been engaged in over the last several months are Southeast Asian markets, Thailand, Vietnam, Indonesia. President Trump just announced a trade deal with Indonesia. That includes a commitment to E10 and to E20. Over time. The only difficulty is I can't tell them that we're stuck at E10 in the United States. So we have a constrained market here in the United States. It will take some time to kind of thaw that that situation out and try to expand the use of E15 in the United States. But in the meantime, our producers want to continue to grow, and our producers are seeing that demand, global demand, as a very positive sign, not just for those producers that are exporting directly, but also those producers that like to see strong competitive prices, so that they're bringing their profit margins are healthy, and they're operating in the black.
Anything else you'd want to say before we close?
Oh man, look, Brazil and U.S. are going to get back together, and we're going to solve our problems. I will put money on it. The world demand is growing. That's the one thing I think is the takeaway from that. We had a gentleman from Hyson, Paulo Macedo, one of the largest sugarcane producers, and we haven't had somebody from Brazil at this conference in a little while because of the tension between our two countries. I wanted to make sure that representation was on that stage today, because I see the thawing of that relationship, of that détente that we've been kind of facing between our two nations, because the world is growing. And and one of the things that I think was said at the end of our panel was that we never talked about China. that elephant's still sitting in the room and not being talked about. But we're continuing to grow. So I think the growth opportunities Brazil. I'm glad that Brazil was there. I think the takeaway is that there's more room for collaboration, and there's less of a requirement of competition. When I say competition, I mean world, somebody asserting dominance. I think there's a large enough pie out there for us all to eat well and to have a full plate and a full stomach. So I think the takeaway is collaboration is the word for 2026.
Jared Mullendor, Policy Counsel and Director of Government Affairs for RFA, moderated a panel on the 45Z Clean Fuel Tax Credit, which still has yet to have regulations finally approved by the U.S. Treasury.
The interesting part of this is we all said we can't possibly do this thing until we have, dry ink on final guidance that answers every possible question that could come up. And we don't have that. I think it's been just in the last year that the industry has started saying, maybe that's not weird, right? Like I said in the panel at one point, I thought about bringing another panelist who was just someone who had worked on the last tax credit to get implemented and how long that took. because you're going to operate with a certain degree of uncertainty in the first few years of a tax credit. We're just here at NEC with filing season coming up. We have a lot of fiscal year filers that are already, tapping their toes about this thing, and we're going to have to embrace that uncertainty. IRS is taking our phone calls. Our members are operating, and it's going to be okay.
And 45Z is a tool for not just ethanol producers. Did I get that right, or is that really the basis of it?
Pretty much liquid fuel. The biodiesel, the sustainable aviation fuel can get in on this. It's a performance standard, right? So it's designed, I think, I'm putting words in mouths here, but it's designed to encourage investment in efficiency and emissions. And to the extent we can bring those numbers down or make them better, there's a little more money in it for the producer. So that's really how we're operating.
Following up on that topic, RFA's Tad Hepner, Vice President of Strategy and Innovation, had a panel focused on low-carbon technology and CO2 utilization to add value to ethanol production.
So it was kind of in regard to 45Z. That's going to be a transformational opportunity for ethanol producers to sell tax credits. With that tax credit, they can invest in new technologies. And some of those things are things like direct conversion of CO2 into alternative chemicals, green chemicals. There are interesting ways to reduce CI by using, in the case of Antora, thermal battery systems that utilize off-peak and cheap renewable energy to create steam at an ethanol plant. So if you're in a place where your power purchases are not as clean, you could use renewable energy credits, or you could take advantage of off-peak options to have a reduction in that. And then lastly, it was with regard to 45Q. There's CO2 sequestration. We know that we have a pipeline in Nebraska. There's other pipeline opportunities that are taking a little bit longer. But let's talk about if I don't live in a place geographically that has the correct geology to sink a well on my site, what does that look like if I try to do a destination opportunity? And so renewable energy, alternative CO2 options, and then, of course, sequestration.
We're getting close to there, right? So did you talk a little bit about when would they be able to use this tool?
So even though we haven't gotten final 45Z guidance, it's been a law or a rule for about a year. And so a lot of ethanol producers have been acting as if this is the case. We can't lose a year, so we're going to act as if we have final guidance. If we need to, we can go back and kind of correct some things afterwards, but the whole industry has been taking advantage of this 40 feet and acting as if we have guidance. And so what that does is allow ethanol producers to take some of that 45Z opportunity and turn that into other things that I maybe couldn't afford before or didn't have the ability to pay for. So it's a tremendous opportunity, and we already see a number of our members that are already taking steps to get to lower CI by implementing some of these technologies. As you saw during the panel, there's an installation of the Antora thermal battery system. That's happened, and it's out there in the wild. And so a lot of this provides ethanol producers with an opportunity to go after some of those things and be ready to capture more of that 45Z.
Opportunities for ethanol in maritime and aviation fuel were also discussed at NEC, and RFA's Industry Award was presented to LanzaJet CEO Jimmy Samartzis.
We are a technology provider and producer of sustainable aviation fuel using ethanol as the feedstock.
Well, I want to congratulate you on RFA's Industry Award here.
First of all, I'm grateful to the RFA for the award. It's a great recognition for the team and recognizing the work that it's taken us 15 years to do. The opportunity that we've created is for ethanol to be used and be transformed into a drop-in jet fuel and renewable diesel to satisfy requirements that exist around the world for aviation, predominantly.
Is this just at one plant at this point, or is there room for growth?
Yeah, lots of opportunity for growth. We've built the first plant here in the United States. It's in rural Georgia in a town called Soperton. We have other projects around the world as well. So not only in the U.S., but we have projects in Australia, India, Japan, United Kingdom, and the European Union. So a lot of activity and a lot of interest in ethanol across the global market.
Well, for the process that you've created or built, what kind of volumes of this would you be able to make and make it economical?
Yeah, so obviously the larger the scale we can build these facilities, the more economical the product is. So our goal is to build them as big as the market sort of demands, if you will. So in some markets, you're constrained by requirements by the government from a policy perspective, where you have to use a waste-based ethanol, and there's only so much waste-based ethanol available. So you're going to build smaller facilities. In countries like the U.S., where you have policy that is helpful but still needs further work, you have the opportunity, because of the feedstock availability, to build very large-scale facilities. So our technology scales really well, up to 300 million gallons a year of production.
And that's it for this edition of the Ethanol Report. For more highlights from the NEC, go to nationalethanolconference.com. Thanks for listening.